Hi guys, it's Century and welcome back to another video, and today we are going to be doing a ranking of all Cybermen stories from the classic era. So I'm going to try and start doing a bit of a series, so I'm going to rank all the Cybermen stories from the classic era, and then next obviously do all Cybermen stories from the new series era, and then, obviously kind of move on to maybe the Daleks and the Sontarans, and so on. Obviously starting off with the Cybermen, so we got first in last place, Revenge of the Cybermen. This is Tom Baker's first and only story against the Cybermen, and I think it's for what it is. It's not the worst thing ever. I think the Cybermen overall in the classic series did have a decent run. I think there isn't a particularly bad Cyberman story. I just think that in this story, although Tom Baker's great in this, and Elizabeth Sladen's great in this, and Ian Marter is great in this, everyone's fine in it. I think just the story's a bit boring, and it's kind of, considering the Daleks were quite in the Pertwee era. There was like quite a couple of Dalek stories in Pertwee's era. He didn't really have a Cyberman story, so this was the first time since 1969 that there was actually a Cyberman story, and I think it just doesn't work, and it's a little bit of a letdown, and that's why it's the worst. I think mainly the fact that the Doctor doesn't really seem to take them as a threat. It's bad, and also in the sense that if you're watching season 12 as a whole run, you've just watched Robot, a really good post-regeneration story, Ark in Space, again a pretty good story, Sontaran's Experiment, a really good two-parter, Genesis of the Daleks, which is just phenomenal, and then you've got this at the end of the season, and it makes me kind of go, oh, I wish there was more. Considering that he had 7 seasons, I'd wish Tom Baker had more Cyberman stories, because it's not amazing. Next we move on to Sylvester McCoy's only Cyberman story with Silver Nemesis. This is the 25th anniversary story. Yeah, it's not amazing, and when I did my ranking of Sylvester McCoy's era in a tier list video, I did say it wasn't my favourite, and I think the fact that it's 25th anniversary makes it pretty bad. But, I mean, it's story's not bad. I think the difference between it is in Revenge of the Cybermen, the story is quite poor, but in Silver Nemesis, the story is there, but it's quite convoluted, and there's too many things kind of happening. It makes it a bit boring. But the reason I definitely put this higher is because Sylvester McCoy's Doctor actually sees these Cybermen as a threat. Like at the end of part 1, when they actually appear in the story, he goes like, he says, oh, they saved my life because she was about to be killed, but the Doctor's like, oh, don't thank them yet, because the Doctor actually feels like they're a threat, whether in the Revenge of the Cybermen, he doesn't think that as much. Next we have the 5 Doctors. Now, I debated putting this in, obviously, because Wheel in Space, which is a Troughton story, wasn't in because I couldn't put it in because only 2 parts survived, and since they haven't animated it yet, I wasn't going to put it in. But then I thought to fill in like a space, I keep the 5 Doctors in, which is not a Cyberman story per se, but the Cybermen do feature heavily in it, and I think if there was one main villain, maybe not. I think the Cybermen were more of a villain than Barusa was, maybe with the Master as well, because Barusa was the overall villain, but the Cybermen were definitely a bit of a threat to the Doctor. Yeah, they're decent in this story, the Cybermen. They're pretty good. I think the aspect of them being in is quite interesting, because they obviously were able to walk around a bit more, so obviously it made more sense for them to be in this countryside rather than the Daleks, or maybe some other villains. However, I think it would have been cooler to see them interact with more than just Peter Davison, because they are seen by Troughton and the Brigadier, but only really Peter Davison seems to really interact with them. And I think it would have been cool to see maybe John Pertwee interact with them, considering John Pertwee didn't get a story with the Cybermen. So it would be nice to see him interact with them, which obviously he hasn't done yet, and which I hope Christopher Eccleston returns, because Christopher Eccleston also hasn't appeared against the Cybermen on TV, and I want that to happen. But next, going into the first of the 60s Cybermen stories, which are the bulk of the Cybermen stories are in the 60s, so it's quite surprising that there's only been 3 stories which haven't been in the 60s until we got to this point, which shows you how good they are. But we've got Tomb of the Cybermen. Now, Tomb of the Cybermen's the only 60s story to have all 4 parts or all 6 parts or all 8 parts surviving, because all other stories has a couple of parts missing. And yes, it's a great story. I love watching Tomb of the Cybermen. As a story, I think by this point the Doctor and Jamie have kind of got more chemistry. I think in season 4 it's there, especially in the remaining bits of evil of the Daleks and possibly the faceless ones. But in the Tomb of the Cybermen, you actually see their friendship, and I think it works in this. Victoria's quite good in this. I really like the speech in this. However, unlike something earlier on or later on in Troughton's tenure, or just in Cybermen stories in general, the Cybermen don't do very much in Tomb of the Cybermen. They are more of a threat, but there's another villain in this story, some humans who are evil, and they don't downplay the Cybermen, because you can see that the Cybermen are more powerful than them, as it is proven in one of the parts. The guy's telling them that he can help them and he's more powerful, and then the Cybermen just basically stick his hands on him and he falls to the ground, basically like, oh, please don't hurt me. But the Cybermen get confined for most of the story underground, and so for those points, apart from the fact that the Cybermen could break out at any minute, you don't actually feel that tension, shall we say. But next we go back all the way to 1966 with not only the first Cybermen story, but the first regeneration story in the 10th Planet. Now, I love the 10th Planet. I think after maybe the 5 Doctors, after all that, everything from the 5 Doctors onwards are all great stories. The other 2 at the bottom are like methy, but the others are great stories. The 10th Planet is really good. William Hartnell is amazing. It's unfortunate that partway through he had a couple of issues with his health, or he just couldn't really perform, and most of his stuff became something like Ben would say, or other characters would just say, because he's great in this, and for what he's in it for, he's amazing. Obviously, similar to the Daleks, which when I do my Dalek classic ranking, I'll get to. I like watching the Cybermen in this stand on their own 2 feet a little bit, because in the new series especially, there are stories where you can go, oh, I love the Cybermen in that. There's definitely ones where you can go, yeah, I do love them in that. But sometimes there are bad stories which the writers kind of go, oh, because it's got the Cybermen in, hopefully no one will realise that it's pretty poor. And I like these kind of first couple of stories with the Cybermen, because you see how good they are, because they are, obviously the writers couldn't go, oh, well, they're the Cybermen, people will like them. They just had to make a story and hope that people enjoyed it, and obviously they received pretty well. In terms of the story, it's obviously quite iconic. The Cybermen are on their last legs and they need to go back to Earth and drain the Earth's power. It's an unusual plot, but it makes sense. It's because the Cybermen at the beginning, maybe not as much nowadays, but at the beginning it was more about survival. It wasn't that they wanted to conquer the galaxy like the Daleks or the Sontarans. They just wanted to survive, any means necessary. And Will Enough and Time definitely elaborated on that with the people who wanted to survive. But yeah, it's an amazing story. Then we get Earthshock, probably the most iconic classic Cybermen story, if I'm honest. It's, again, a really good story. My only issue with this one is that, while yes, I see, unlike Revenge of the Cybermen, again, there was a big gap between the last Cybermen story and this one, but this one seems to do it a bit better. The only issues I have with this is the Doctor. I've never really been too keen on Peter Davison's performance. There are a couple of Peter Davison stories where I like. It's not like he's not got any awful. Some stories of him are pretty bad, and I do like some of his stories, but I'm just not keen on his Doctor, mainly because I think, possibly apart from Nyssa, at one point in time, all of his companions wanted to leave. So in this, Adric wanted to leave, and the Doctor is just quite arrogant about it, and he's really rude. And it's like, well, I was never really a fan of Adric, but it's just kind of like, well, I liked him. Oh, he was okay with Tom Baker in the stories with Tom Baker in, and I think he's not got as good chemistry with Peter Davison. And also, I think as a character-wise, Adric kind of wanted to be taught by Tom Baker because he thought he was more of a mentor, which Peter Davison, maybe because he's quite a little bit younger, Adric doesn't see as like a father figure, a kind of mentor, similar to the person in Full Circle, who I can't remember the name of, who dies near the beginning. But yeah, I think that, and also, I think the Cybermen have a sense. A Cybermen are supposed to have like a sense of stakes, like because the Cybermen used to be about having survival. Like they really wanted to survive. They would do whatever they can to go through their missions. But in this one, it doesn't feel like there's a sense of stakes. They're not actively trying to kill people or convert people or standard Cybermen things. They're just kind of wandering about. Unlike the next story, which is the next appearance of this, this is like the next Doctor, is the Attack of the Cybermen. Now, Attack of the Cybermen is really good. Now, I know I've said this with a couple of them, but I love Attack of the Cybermen. The top 3 Cybermen stories of the classic run are amazing. And I've gone with Attack of the Cybermen film in 3rd place. The reason I like these ones is because season 21, season 22 was kind of the dark seasons of Doctor Who, where things seem to get a bit more gruesome, more people seem to start dying, more people seem to start there's more, the death rates and the casualty rates in the show is definitely getting a lot higher. It probably peaks around now. And then it mostly declines after this. But I like that. In this story, similar to Resurrection of the Daleks, the Cybermen do what you'd expect the Cybermen to do. You don't expect the Cybermen to walk around saying, "Oh, we're going to kill you," as an empty threat. You expect them to act upon what they say. Similar to Resurrection of the Daleks, which is one of the Peter Davison stories that I like. The Daleks, unlike something maybe like Destiny of the Daleks, they go out and kill people because you'd expect the Daleks to try and kill people. That's what they do. They kill things that are different. In Attack of the Cybermen, they go around. They've got one mission in mind, which is to get a time ship and stop Mondas's destruction. Obviously, they needed to get the Doctor's time ship, or they're messing with time. And obviously, as we've seen before, people who mess with time, normally they get Time Lords that don't fit. So the Time Lords sent the Doctor, although that part was a bit iffy because it doesn't really seem to get addressed that well, except for one scene where Colin Baker's angry at the Time Lords, which is quite funny. The Krynoids from on Telos, which is their home planet, which we've seen in Tomb of the Cybermen, was quite a nice concept, because it would make sense that the Cybermen would just take another race's home planet. And also it kind of a weird contrast because the Cybermen are more masculine, whether the Krynoids are more feminine. I think they're the Krynoids. Anyway, they're more of a feminine race. The Stealth Cybermen look really cool. and the cyber lead is like a odd design, but it's a bit odd. But I think the reason this story works is because the Cybermen do brutal things. But anyway, we're now going into second place with the invasion. This is the longest Cybermen story. It's 8 parts. Troughton's last story with the Cybermen. And yeah, it's a really good story. This is like Unit's first proper full story. Brigadier's appeared before, but he was the colonel. But in this now he's the brigadier. This is like the Unit story before Unit became a front runner. I wanted to put this number 1 because I really loved the invasion, but the reason I didn't was because for the first 4 parts until like the cliffhanger in part 4, there isn't the Cybermen aren't in it, except for I believe the Cyber Planet like appears for like a couple of scenes. But there's another villain, Tobias Vaughan, who's played by Kevin Stoney, and Kevin Stoney's appeared in a couple of stories, and he's really good in them. This is definitely his best performance by far. But the Cybermen are like, it's weird because in the first 4 parts, Kevin Stoney's Tobias Vaughan is really good. But then at part 6, he loses his power, or maybe part 5, he kind of loses his power, and then he just kind of gets killed off because, I mean, he was a villain, but he wasn't one of those villains like, I don't know, Loki from Marvel, where he's a villain a little bit, but then he starts to become better and more kind of good in this respect. He didn't really know how to make him nicer, so they had to break him off. But in number 1, we had the moon base. Now, the moon base is so quintessentially Charleston. You've got the Cybermen, probably the most iconic villain of Troughton's run. You've got Troughton himself on really good form. You've got a base under siege. Ironically, you've got missing parts, which is a pretty iconic Troughton trope now. But yeah, it's really good. I think this was like the 10th planet, but they had to slightly change it up a bit. It does in some respects feel like they've gone, oh right, remake the 10th planet, but change it ever so slightly that it doesn't look like it's the 10th planet and it's with a new Doctor. But it works, because I do like the 10th planet, but this just makes it a lot better. I think the good about this scene is the show, and this episode in particular highlights why the show is really good. There are times when you would look at the show and go, oh, that's a bit outdated. I mean, that's pretty bad. But then there's other times when you go, that's why it's a classic. And there's a lot of stuff like that. It's like The Chase and other older stuff. You think that's a bit outdated, but you still got to respect it and stuff. I think the one downside of this is, as I said, I don't think Jamie's and the Doctor's relationship really starts to get going until season 5. But that kind of gets elaborated on a bit here, because in season 4, I don't really think he's the best, and then especially in this story he's just going to get sidelined for a lot of it. But that does mean that Ben gets to do a lot more. But yeah, that's just my opinion on all these stories. If you have enjoyed, please think about liking and subscribing, and maybe watch another video. Hopefully I will be able to do a Cybermen Part 2 for the new series in next week. But yeah, see you.